Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this Wednesday's edition, middle of the week edition of Alaska Weather, 24th day of August. I'm David Percy. Up first, we'll see we've got on the hazardous weather graphic now a coastal flood advisory out for the Kuskokwim Delta coastline, not the entire coastline there, but from Kipnuk to Kuskokwim Bay. And that's for the period Thursday from 7 a.m. Thursday until 4 p.m. And that's for 4 to 6 foot above normal, above tide normal seas, with offshore waves running 4 to 8 feet. So again, the tides will be 4 to 6 feet above the normal high tide zone, with waves into the offshore areas of Kuskokwim Bay and along that coastline to Kipnuk as high as 8 feet. And again, that's 7 a.m. Thursday to 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And that due to long fetch of westerly winds across the Bering Sea. In fact, gale warnings are out along the coast there for tomorrow for the Kuskokwim Delta coastline south of Nunivak Island for south winds, south to southwest winds up to 35 knots. And then here for the Kenai Peninsula, still that flood advisory going through Saturday into the weekend for the Kenai River. Best chance of flooding would be along the Kenai River. I should say the best chance of minor flooding could occur along the Kenai River there. The water levels will be on the high side there, at least into the weekend. And from there, we'll go to satellite imagery showing long fetch of moisture there, starting to thin out with a wave developing off the coast of the Panhandle there, that band coming up into Yakutat. That brought about 3/4 of an inch of precipitation into Yakutat in the last 12 hours, ending at 3 p.m. this afternoon. Kind of a persistent area of diminishing rainfall there, and some pretty good rains moved into the Copper River Basin on up to a lesser extent in the eastern interior areas, and some rain back into at least the Kenai Peninsula and northern Cook Inlet today after kind of just a cloudy start to the during the morning into the afternoon. Got some rain now back into at least Anchorage area, and an area of moisture up over the northwest part of the state brought anywhere from 1/3 of an inch to 1/2 inch of rain in some areas up in that location there, and that south of the Brooks Range, lighter amounts on the north side of the mountains up there. And the next front doesn't look all that impressive. It's kind of broken up with, you can see some holes in it, kind of shredded, not a real solid band yet, but that'll probably get a little more organized as it approaches the coast. You can see some clouds making landfall already here at 3 p.m. along the Kuskokwim Delta coast, mid and high level clouds there, with some moisture back across the Pribilofs. Only 0.02 of an inch fell at Atka Island, so it's really not much of a rain producer yet, or it's just missing all the spotty observation points we have out there. But there will be an increase in the moisture as that heads into the coastline. And running that through again, you can see, well, it's hard to see, but there was an area of clearing kind of pinching off there up north of the central interior, north of the Yukon River in the central interior. But areas of clearing, Kuskokwim Valley on down into Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay, Kuskokwim Delta area, Bethel up to 65 today, and some temperatures in the mid, some cases upper 60s in Bristol Bay. Kodiak, more cloudy conditions there. They picked up about, earlier today, they had about 3/4 of an inch precipitation as well. And Valdez had 0.6 of an inch, and actually some isolated thunderstorm activity showing up earlier today east of Cordova, just a few lightning strikes, same thing up there in the upper Yukon River area, and also out over the lower and mid Yukon River, associated with that trough over the northwest interior. And rain in the Copper River Basin amounted to about 1/2 inch at Gulkana, while Ambler picked up 1/3 of an inch. I think I mentioned Valdez had 0.6 of an inch. And otherwise, notice the clearing over the central and southern southeast coast. They had some clouds with a couple of sprinkles, a little bit of light rain in Juneau today. Still, their temperatures this afternoon reached 75 degrees, big upper level high pressure area over western Canada there, just close enough to the southeast coast there to bring some pretty warm temperatures in. Again, 75 in Juneau, Cake, and Wrangell, and the warmest spot was at Stewart, 81 degrees there this afternoon, at mid-afternoon. And Ketchikan, Klawock, about 73, so very nice conditions there, but that's going to change this weekend and into the first of next week. Kind of a showery pattern there, that weakening low near Kodiak Island, and then that front coming across the Bering Sea. Notice the good westerly flow behind that. That's going to push it along quite nicely there, and that's going to increase the precipitation, wind, and decrease the flying conditions. Ceiling visibility, of course, will come down, probably some IFR in advance of that front. But that'll push some rain into the Prairie Bluffs this evening. Could start any minute there. Lighter amounts of precipitation to the south there over the east central Aleutians from about Adak in toward the Fox Islands, but that'll start pushing inland slowly tonight. Otherwise, the interior, kind of a weak trough that's bringing the rain now to areas of south central Alaska, kind of slips up to the northeast a little bit. So that'll change, become a little more showery for Cook Inlet. May end over most of the Kenai Peninsula. Scattered showers Prince William Sound. Drying out over the Copper River Basin, and some showers up over the north central or the eastern interior there. Kind of unsettled along the Arctic coast, some light precipitation, fog possible there, but winds on the light side. And that trough trying to make a move in, that wave kind of tries to nudge that moisture a little farther south and east, but stays dry over the southern panhandle. And we'll see for Thursday, that trough kind of shears off to the southeast with some building high pressure over the Gulf of Alaska. That turns the wind flow more to west-northwest, and that'll push that moisture farther south, maybe a chance of showers into the southern panhandle in the afternoon, but they'll be pretty light, definitely cloudier and cooler conditions though. And scattered showers on the North Gulf Coast, areas of light rain, mostly from the Alaska Range westward, showers over the Susitna-Matanuska Valley, Kenai Peninsula, that trough, southwest flow, not a real dry pattern, but not a real wet pattern yet, and scattered showers up over the mountains north of Fairbanks and over the eastern part of this, along the Canadian border there. Otherwise, again, that westerly flow across the Bering Sea, that's what's brought the high surf advisories into the Kuskokwim Delta coast for those wave heights 4 to 8 feet and 4 to 6 foot sea higher than normal high tides with that. And but that'll start to diminish on winds as that front pushes inland. Rain will increase there over the western interior, farther inland. And it's a pretty weak front, though, down across the Alaska Peninsula. So it'll be a little breezy, but rainfall amounts won't be that heavy. And then it dries out for the remainder of the Aleutians there with maybe some clearing. A few showers begin to push back in toward the Prairie Bluffs with that second trough there, but they'll be pretty light. And then for the day Friday, as that front crosses the Alaska Peninsula into Kodiak, a weak low develops there and develops a frontal system, pushes moderate amounts of rain up to the North Gulf Coast and increasing moisture for the northern panhandle late in the day, less of a chance down to the south. Interior Alaska looks pretty cloudy and areas of rain, most areas drier though as usual over toward the eastern interior areas to the border. Chance of rain for the Arctic coast and periods of rain and showers right out to the southwest coast, and a warm front nudges some moisture northward there to the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula. Drying out, Adak westward to Shimia, maybe some clearing, and low clouds, fog, drizzle, periods of rain, St. Lawrence Island, another batch of moisture poised to make landfall on the Yukon Delta coast. So pretty unsettled conditions there. And again, look for downturn, heavier, wetter weather, or heavier rain coming into the panhandle, definitely wetter, cooler conditions for the weekend into the first of next week. And for the lows tonight, pretty mild there, mid to upper 50s for the southeast coast, and lower 50s, south central Alaska, mid to upper 40s in the Copper River Basin, and near 50 for the Bristol Bay Area, lower 50s Kodiak Island and Kuskokwim Valley. Highs, 55 to 60 in the Kuskokwim Valley, and 55 to 60 for the south central Alaska area, Talkeetna down to Homer, lower 60s in the Copper River Basin, and upper 50s along the North Gulf Coast. And now you can see back down into the upper 60s for the highs over the southern panhandle. It may still be maybe a 70, 71 in some locations, but definitely a cooling trend starting. And near 60 for Kodiak, 55 to 62 for Bristol Bay, 55 to 60 in the Kuskokwim Valley. And for the lows, Friday morning, 40s and lower 50s across the entire area about sums it up. A little cooler now over the panhandle, lows in the lower to mid 50s. And the highs the next day, cooler yet for your highs, mid-60s, southern panhandle, upper 50s to the north. 55 to 60 Copper River Basin, mid to upper 50s, south central Alaska, Kuskokwim Valley, Bristol Bay, maybe 60 for Kodiak Island. Up to the north, 40s along the Arctic coast, except the central coast there, upper 30s. And that extends down to south of the Brooks Range for upper 40s to near 50, followed by highs 65 to 71 for the eastern interior there, cooler 50s out to the west and also to the north. Lows the following morning in the 40s to lower 50s. 40s for the Arctic coast and North Slope, upper 40s out toward the Bering Sea. And then the highs Friday afternoon, lower to mid-60s for the eastern interior now to near 60 in the central interior, in the 50s out to the west. And notice the 60-degree reading there forecast for Prudhoe Bay on the Arctic coast. And for the southwest areas, 40s and 50s for the lows, Bering Sea, Alaska Peninsula, mostly lower 50s over the mainland areas. Highs tomorrow, 50s to lower 60s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Okay, on to flying weather. Pretty good up north there. A little bit of marginal VFR along the central Arctic coast. Otherwise, VFR for the remainder of the area down to and across the eastern Brooks Range into the interior. Good VFR until you get to about the southern Kuskokwim Valley and then into Bristol Bay and all of south central Alaska, east and south of the Alaska Range, Copper River Basin, Gulf, Kodiak Island, eastward, all of the Panhandle, or most of the Panhandle, marginal VFR to start out Thursday. And then some IFR with the next front pushing onshore to the Yukon Delta, and then back to the west, quite a ways there, and southward across the Pribilofs IFR, eastern Aleutians IFR. Behind the front, though, bringing out the VFR over Adak and Atka. And for the afternoon, we've got that zone of IFR pushes inland right into the Kuskokwim Valley, almost into the central interior by afternoon, or during the afternoon, latter part of the afternoon, into looks like almost Tanana. Start seeing ceilings visibilities come down. Arctic coast, western North Slope, Seward Peninsula, and right on down into just north of Iliamna Lake. Otherwise, the remainder of the area, Bristol Bay, northern Bering Sea, marginal VFR. Marginal VFR holds southern Alaska there, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, Kodiak, improving over the Panhandle. So marginal VFR there, north of Sitka, or along the north coast up to possibly northern Lynn Canal to Skagway, but pretty good for the remainder of the Panhandle down to Dixon Entrance. VFR for the eastern Aleutians. And for the Friday morning time frame, VFR still holds there, kind of a swath across the south central Bering Sea, southern Bering Sea, and that spreads into the Alaska Peninsula and almost to the Pribilofs, just some areas of marginal VFR for the central and western Aleutians. IFR up to the north there, northern Bering Sea, St. Lawrence Island, northwestward there across the western Brooks Range, central, western, North Slope, and Arctic coast. Good VFR, northern Cook Inlet, right on up to the eastern Brooks Range here, and most of the Yukon River Valley and just about all of the Kuskokwim River Valley areas. And for Friday afternoon, big change. All of a sudden, IFR shows up, North Gulf Coast, Yakutat, heading northwest and expanding across the northwest part of the state, just about all the west coast, and some IFR into Bristol Bay. IFR for the eastern Aleutians, Kodiak Island, south central Alaska, and the northern three-quarters of the Panhandle, staying VFR over the eastern interior and the southern southeast coast. Passes Anaktuvik, VFR, coming down to IFR during the latter part of the afternoon, coming down also for Adigan, but probably only to marginal VFR until tomorrow evening. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, just look for a deterioration in conditions from west to east throughout the entire day. Same thing for Rainy, but marginal VFR becomes IFR, especially on the western entrance during the afternoon hours. And for Windy, VFR, but trending downward on the southern approach there. And Isabel, VFR tomorrow. Thursday, a good VFR day from Antasta, occasionally marginal from Tanita. And Portage, marginal VFR. Chilkoot and White, pretty marginal. Freezing levels about 8,000 feet over interior Alaska, otherwise up to 14,000 feet over the southern Panhandle, 16,000 feet over the west central Aleutians. Icing, a huge area of higher potential icing with some considerable moderate up over the western interior there, and that isolated moderate extends down southwestward to the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, and some leftover moisture there icing over the Panhandle. And the jet stream showing good westerly, strong westerly flow across the Bering Sea, a couple upper level lows, one coming into St. Lawrence Island, the other one back over the Russian Far East yet, and then another upper low just north of Yakutat. That's going to be pushing that moisture quite rapidly eastward and then east-northeastward, 9,000 feet, 50 to 60 knot winds out of the west or west-northwest, turn southwest, 45 into the central interior. 3,000 feet, pretty good winds here, 50 knots Alaska Peninsula up toward Togiak Bay, otherwise 40 to 45 knots into the western interior. Much lighter as you head east there, light and variable over the southeast part of the state, interior areas, as well as the Panhandle, west 45 over the Bering Sea. And turbulence-wise, quite an area, considerable moderate turbulence. Again, that'll be advancing from west to east throughout the day to about this position by mid-afternoon. And that starts to affect Shelikof Strait, Kodiak Island, all the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, and Atka Island westward to Shimi and Attu, and northward there to the northwest coast. And after the break, I'll be back with the marine forecasts.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, joined once again by the science liaison of GINA, Eric Stevens. GINA, of course, is the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And GINA is all about satellites, and Eric is always here to tell some really cool stuff about satellites. Now, the last time you were here, we talked about how the weather satellites can see clouds and what's under the clouds, but you're telling me that satellites can do a lot more, even protect the general public with aviation safety information.
That's right. There's one particular aspect of satellites we're going to talk about today that might not be immediately obvious, and that is detecting things in the atmosphere that are not clouds, that are not snow, not rain, but rather a hazard that can happen here in Alaska, and that is volcanic ash.
Of course.
When a volcano goes off, puts ash in the air, this is of course a hazard to the public if the ash were to fall on the ground in accumulating amounts.
Sure.
Additionally, while the ash is in the air, and this is the more frequent hazard, is it's a hazard to aviation because you cannot fly an airplane into volcanic ash without great risk. Worst case scenario, the ash gets into a jet engine, wrecks the engine, kills the engine, and now you have an airplane flying with no engines. It won't fly for long. So aviators need to avoid that ash. How do you avoid the ash? You have to know where it is by identifying it with a satellite image and perhaps predicting then where the ash will flow with the overall weather patterns. Satellites are so important for identifying when a volcano goes off and then tracking the ash after the volcano injects the ash into the atmosphere.
Now, are you talking about seeing the heat signature or a huge volcanic plume with a cloud that we're used to seeing in the really pretty pictures of any Alaska volcano that's erupted recently, Redoubt, for example? Or are we talking about the really fine details? Because this is polar orbiting satellites, the ones that are very low to the ground, right?
The geostationary satellites can do some detection. The polar orbiters, like you say, they're closer to the Earth. They give the even better view. In answer to your question, I would say all of the above. A heat signature from a volcano going off with all the heat that comes with the eruption, that can be identified in infrared imagery. We've got images from the Kamchatka Peninsula. That's the far eastern part of Russia on the western side of the Bering Sea, loaded with volcanoes. You know, Alaska has plenty of volcanoes of its own. We can also be affected when a volcano goes off in Kamchatka, say, and then the weather carries that ash toward Alaska from the west. You can see the infrared heat signature, like you say. Also, the ash in the air can be detected by doing some sophisticated channel differencing within the satellite data. You can find the identification of sulfur dioxide, say, that's a component of the volcanic emission, and you can trace this with the satellite imagery. Sometimes volcanoes go off that haven't gone off before, and we're not expecting them to go off. Say if there's no seismometers around a given volcano that hasn't gone off in 100 years, you might not be expecting it to go off in the satellite imagery. Since satellites can be globally comprehensive, that might be the first sign that you have that a volcano in an unexpected area is going off.
So it's a good backup system.
Right, right. And people are working all the time on automating the interrogation of satellite data by computers to provide a first alert to a human, so the software will say, we think this might be important. Human, go take a closer look. Because the people are still the best way to interrogate the imagery, but the planet's a big place, and we can't be looking everywhere all the time, so the software helps give a first cut. And then in Alaska, there's a special kind of surprise angle where the satellites are helpful, and that is the Katmai eruption of 1912. Huge eruption. There is still somewhat of a moonscape out there in southwest Alaska where all this ash is laying on the ground. And sometimes a strong weather pattern comes along where we have roaring northwest winds that go across the Alaska Peninsula there and can actually pick some of this ash up off the ground. No volcano is going off. This was more than 100 years ago that volcano actually blew. So you're not going to see a heat signature like we were discussing. There will be no seismic signature of a volcano going off. So those data sets, they'll say, oh, no problem. But you can see in some of the satellite imagery this ash, as it's called, resuspended. When the wind comes along, picks it up, the ash can be lofted a few thousand feet in the air just with the wind. And an airplane flying into that plume is exposed to some danger. So we need to track that ash to provide guidance to aviators that you don't want to be flying here at these elevations in this area. We've got some imagery of the resuspension, and you can see the wind blowing strongly from the northwest, picking up the ash and blowing it down to the southeast. And so that's another, perhaps not immediately obvious hazard of volcanic ash. Katmai is the gift that keeps on giving, for sure.
Very good. So we've got satellites that can help us understand the weather from the past and the immediate past. And we talked last time about how that's feeding into the forecast modeling to help improve predictions. But now they're also protecting the general public with aviation-sensitive information and watching volcanoes, whether they're erupting or maybe have erupted in the past, and finding the left-behinds from those volcanic events there. So really impressive stuff. Eric, thanks so much for joining us again today. And you're a gift that keeps on giving from the satellite community, so thanks a lot, and we hope to have you back again soon. Again, Eric Stevens with Gina at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And if you'd like to check out any of the information that Eric has shared with us again today, you can do that very easily by going to www.gina.alaska.edu. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at today's sea ice analysis, not much different really from the last few days. Still some areas of thin ice here right along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, especially west of Prudhoe Bay over toward Barter Island. And at some point that may open up and allow navigation through there, but have to wait and see. On to coastal water forecasts for the southeast coast. South coast of the Panhandle there, looking at west to northwest winds 15 to 20 knots. Seas 5 to 6 feet. The north coast, west winds 10 to 15 knots. Lynn Canal, southerlies tomorrow, 15 knots, and south at 10 for Stevens Passage. Clarence Strait, variable to northwest breeze at 10 knots. On Friday, on the south coast, west winds 20 knots. North coast, west-southwest, 20 knots. Seas 7 feet, the entire stretch of the coastline. And the central northern interchannels, south winds at 15 knots, and for Clarence Strait, northwest winds 15 knots. Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, light variable winds for the day Thursday at 10 knots. Seas laid down pretty good there for the North Gulf Coast at 5 feet. South winds 15 knots for the Barren Islands. Small craft advisories for Kamishak Bay, southeast winds coming up to 25 knots. Cook Inlet, south winds 20 knots, seas 5 to 6 feet. And for Friday, Cook Inlet, south to southwest winds, 20 knots. Kamishak Bay, lighter winds from the southwest at 15 knots. Small craft advisories for the Barren Islands, western North Gulf Coast for southwest winds at 25. And the eastern North Gulf Coast, south at 20. Prince William Sound, southeast wind 15 knots. Kodiak Island for Thursday, west or south to southwest winds 20 to 25 knots. Sitkinak to Castle Cape, southwest winds 25 knots. And Bering Sea side, the Alaska Peninsula, south winds 30 knots. Same thing for Bristol Bay, southerly winds increasing to 30 knots, seas around 5 feet. And for Friday, Bristol Bay, winds turning southwest, dropping to 20 knots, seas though at 7 feet. And small craft advisories for the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula, southwest winds 25 knots. And for Kodiak Island, southwest winds 25 to 30 knots. Eastern Aleutians, south to southwest winds 25 to 30 knots for the day Thursday. Central Aleutians, lighter winds out of the west 20 to 25 knots. Back to small craft advisories for the western Aleutians, west-southwest 25 to 30 knots. And for Friday, western Aleutians coming down now. West winds 15 to 20 knots, Adak and Atka. West winds 20 knots, seas around 8 feet. Eastern Aleutians, west to southwest winds 20 to maybe 25 knots with 6 to 10 foot seas. Southwest coast, those gale warnings are still out for the Kuskokwim Delta coastline. South, 35 knots, seas 10 feet. Small craft advisories, Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island, and Norton Sound, all looking at a 30-knot wind tomorrow out of the south. Southwest 25 for the Pribilofs and St. Matthew Island. And for Friday, Pribilof, St. Matthew Island, small craft advisories, west winds 25 knots, southwest 25 for the southwest coast south of Nunivak Island, 20 knots out of the southwest for the Yukon Delta coast, and southwest 25, St. Lawrence Island into Norton Sound. Central Eastern Arctic coast, call it variable winds at about 10 knots with slight seas. West side, though, east at 15, 20-knot winds, Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort and Cape Thompson to Wales. Small craft advisory, southeast at 25. And for Friday, from Wales to Cape Thompson, south winds 15 knots. They turn northeast there from Cape Thompson up the west side and central coast of the Arctic coast there, all northeast at 15, 3-foot seas, and then kind of a south to southeast wind at 15 knots for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast with seas 3 feet along the entire coastline. And for tonight, up along the Arctic coast, maybe some areas of light rain, fog, and drizzle. Possible IFR flying conditions in that. Otherwise, the interior, scattered showers, but moisture is starting to increase, especially as you head toward the coastline tonight, pushing inland. Look for increasing wind and rain, especially starting on the Yukon Delta coast, spreading up into the Bering Strait and eventually in toward Togiak. Lighter amounts with that trailing edge dragging across the central and eastern Aleutians. Otherwise, showers try to push a little farther south into the panhandle tonight with that moisture boundary there weakening but shifting eastward, and it's going to start shearing off to the southeast tomorrow, maybe spreading some showers down toward Dixon Entrance. Otherwise, wind and rain coming into the western interior, increasing rain for south central Alaska, showers Copper River Basin and the east side. And for Friday, next system begins a heavy rain pattern there for the eastern North Gulf Coast and eventually the panhandle as we head into the weekend. And cloudy and wet for the interior Friday about sums it up. Thank you for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.